Hey everyone, I'm back on the channel. Thanks for joining. I wanted to do this installment because I think it's an important little conversation, and so I hope you've been enjoying my videos so far. Sorry, my hair is again. I just kind of jump on my video. Don't spend a lot of time in front of the mirror or preparing for my videos, but sometimes my points might not be perfect, but I hope they're helpful for people. And so let me know if they've been helping you think through some of this stuff. And I'm always open to hearing other thoughts as well. So today's topic is going to be about violence in the Old Testament and kind of talking about like why that's such a turnoff for people with Christianity. And so, like I said, I kind of enter into these videos just not knowing where it's going to lead me or where I'm going to go. But I kind of, I don't want to just read something or spend all week preparing, because then I might like mess some things up. I'm sure I might make stronger points, but um, yeah. So this one's a really hard question, and I think that as Christians we need to take it very seriously and really think through these things and consider what you know what are people first of all, what are people's motivations when they bring up the violence in the Old Testament, uh, or like maybe jo- uh, laws that they perceive to be unjust in the Old Testament. And so what are their motivations? Are their motivations to really like find out, or are there motivations to accuse the Christian for believing in that, or are there motivations to be putting themselves in the judgment seat over God and saying, well, God was wrong. He said to go kill this people, right? And so I think the third one is really, if that's you, or if somebody you talked to, if that's what they were thinking, that's not a very wise place to be. If Because first of all, if they're saying God is like that, then lots of times they say he's a big meanie. He's just a mean character. Well, God, we have to remember God is God, right? He's not just another bro walking down the street. He's the immutable, holy God, and holy means he's set apart from sin. He's set apart from wickedness and evil, and he does not tolerate it. He does not tolerate evil in the way that we sometimes tolerate it as human beings. And even we don't tolerate evil, and that's why we create justice systems, court systems. I mean, when you see a prisoner behind bars, you know that, well, some people are put in prison unjustly, but just bear with me. You know that that person is behind bars, and that shows that there's a criminal justice system. So in the same way, like kind of the way we have morality, that shows that because there is an objective morality, that shows that there's a moral designer, right? But that's neither here nor there. What I wanted to get to is that God has, if God is God, he has the right to do whatever he wants. He has the right to strike me with lightning right now. And I can't really make a case against him because I'm finite and he's infinite. Moreover, he has a greater understanding of eternity, and we just see things in this life. So it's kind of like a painting, right? Brushstrokes in the painting they're a part of the painting, but they don't have the outside perspective of the entire painting. And so God knew the end from the beginning. He knew the way that everything was going to unfold and the way everything is still unfolding. And he knew the way to make it happen. He knew how to preserve humanity. He knew how to help humanity, and he also knew how to punish humanity. And if we think about a punishment coming from God, it's not going to be like a punishment coming from men. It's not going to be like a prison sentence. it's going to look more like an entire people being engulfed with flame, like in Sodom and Gomorrah, right? And so it's going to look like a larger judgment. And so that's another thing that I think people will point to instances in the Bible where there was great amount of violence. I mean, this just popped in my head. If you look at Samson, Samson killed, like, I think it was like 1,000 Philistines with the donkey's jawbone, and then later he killed like even more Philistines, and he killed himself too when this happened. But he with his strength, it was God's strength working through him. He collapsed the temple of Dagon, I believe, and killed all the Philistines that were in there with him. And so I guess like what we could say, if we're looking at that from a perspective of like there is no God, then, well, first of all, how would he have the strength to do that if God wasn't working through him? But like, what gave him the right to make that decision to take out all these people? And obviously we know that God was working through Samson, but there's also an aspect of Samson doing what was right in his own eyes. We know that Samson's story was not perfect, and that's another thing. When we look at violence in the Bible, just because there's violence in the Bible doesn't mean that violence has to be attributed to God. It can be attributed to humans acting like humans, making mistakes just like they do today. But oftentimes they were the good guys. They were the ones on God's side. In another story in Judges, was where the king of Sihon has a spike driven through his brain, right? And that was an act. An act that was for the good that God saw, because this king was oppressive. This king was evil. And so there are many battles. There are rising and falling of nations. And so I think that emerged from human corruption and a human corrupt nature. And when we think about God preserving Israel and sending Israel into the land of Canaan to have its own land, God knew how to preserve them, and he had to protect them. And sometimes he would do that through, they would have to protect themselves through warfare as well, or they would not have a nation. They would not have survived as a nation. So I think a lot of people are quick to put the accusation on God for the violence in the Bible without recognizing that it's humans acting like humans for the most part. And often the humans would ask God if he would deliver a people into their hands. And God would say either yes or no. And that would result in either victory or defeat. So, anyways, yeah, I think there's a lot more answers. And if the other thing I wanted to point out is, like, when you're having a conversation about violence in the Old Testament, I think it's better to look at exactly what they're talking about, the person who's bringing up that point, because lots of times there are good points that we need to take seriously, and not just come up with an answer for it right away, but to actually say, like, hey, like, if we don't know the answer, because we can give a kind of a half-hearted answer, and that can be more damaging than actually saying, hey, I don't know the answer, I'm going to go look into this, and then come back and maybe we can have another conversation about it. But because they are important, and if the person really wants to know the answer and wants to find out if what was really going on there, because lots of times there's more happening than what we read in the text. So and that brings me to, so what I was just going to say, and then we can come back to them with a more comprehensive view. But if we just kind of give them a half-hearted answer, it can be more damaging than helpful. I think. And I've actually fallen into that trap before, so I'm definitely not perfect. I'm preaching to myself here. So the other thing that I thought was, I watched a video on this that was very interesting, because there are laws like in Deuteronomy and Leviticus that that I struggle with when I read them. I can't think of any off the top of my head right now, so I'm not intentionally trying to hide anything. But there are laws that are challenging that people point to, and they say, like, well, look, what kind of law would allow this? And I think what the best answer is that I mentioned this in another one of my videos, is that we are all men and women of our times. And so God's law was not a law of perfection. It was a law to show the neighboring nations who he was through Israel. So he had given Israel a law that was not yet the perfect fulfillment of the law. Otherwise, Jesus wouldn't have had to come. But he gave them a law that shined above and beyond the laws that surrounded them. So I think a lot of these other nations were living with laws that were a lot more wicked than what, obviously what the Israelites were doing at that time. And so that law was meant to be an arrow pointing north for a people who were very far south, if that makes any sense. So I believe that the moral law that God gave his people Israel were not yet the complete law and the law in completion. And even when you see the new the 10 Commandments, like thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not murder, thou shalt not commit adultery. Later on, when you have Jesus, who was God in the flesh, the embodiment of the law, he said that he even showed that those laws were obsolete because he revealed the spiritual nature of the law. And there were like kind of misogynistic things going on in the Old Testament. And Jesus, when he was presented with the woman and they said, the law says she ought to be stoned to death. And he looked at them and he said, let whoever's without sin cast the first stone. So Jesus' authority showed what the real intentionality was behind the law. The law was out of love, but the people had made the people of that time, when Jesus was there in first century Judea, had made the traditions and the way that they interpreted the law into an idol itself. And Jesus recognized that. So when he preached the Sermon on the Mount, he recognized the true intentionality behind the law and the true spirit behind the law. Like, whoever lusts after a woman in his heart commits adultery. And whoever hates his neighbor has in effect committed murder. And so he really understood what was behind the law. And so I think that's a good piece of understanding for the way we are to approach looking at the Old Testament law, but also looking at violence and recognizing, like, hey, we really need to pinpoint where this is actually God acting on a people, and if that is the case, see why that is. Or when this is a people acting out of their own interests or doing what is right in their own eyes, and it doesn't make any sense to pin that on God. And then thinking about if God is real, right? I'm saying this for the people who are arguing against the violence in the Old Testament. But if God is real, which they're saying, okay, if he's real, then he has to be this mean tyrant. Well, how foolish is it of you to put yourself in the judgment seat over God? So those are the points that I wanted to make for this more brief video. But I hope this was helpful to somebody out there. Please like, share, subscribe, and I will see you in the next installment.